What's going on, H2 Army? Justin from H2O Plants. Today we're back with another quick tip video. Today we're going to be talking about floating plants, the pros and the cons. So stay tuned to check that out. Alright guys, before we get into this, if you're new here, make sure you hit that subscribe button, and also if you're a long-time subscriber or you're new, hit the bell. It's highly important. You won't get my videos unless you hit that bell, so make sure you do so. I don't understand why YouTube's doing this whole thing, but make sure you hit the bell as well. Also, if you enjoy this video at any point, share with your friends and like. It really helps out and I really appreciate it. But let's get into the pros and cons of floating plants. Alright, so why would you want floating plants in your tank? Now, floating plants are a plant that sits at the top of the water surface and has roots that run down into the water. As you can see here, little tiny roots, but they do get rather large. I'll throw up some pictures of some roots that are really big, but you could also see here, these are some roots. If the goldfish want to move, these are some roots also that are from a floating plant. So why do you want floating plants? Well, one, they have access to the atmosphere CO2. So what they're going to do is they're going to grow so much faster than any plant you put down here, just because they have the environment available to them versus what CO2 levels are in your water to grow. So they're going to grow super fast. When they grow super fast, because they're closest to the light, they have all this CO2 available, they're going to absorb all the nitrates that your fish will produce through the nitrogen cycle, where their fish waste that turns in from their fish poop to ammonia to nitrite and then to nitrate. These plants are going to absorb them so much faster than any other plant in your tank. They're also going to grow super fast, like so fast that's going to be unbelievable. They will reproduce crazy amounts of plants. Now, this could be a good thing or a bad thing. They also provide an excellent spot for fry. I don't know if you're going to see this little guy, but there is a little tiny fry there. As my goldfish swim in front. You see him right there? Well, that is a fry, and I'm not sure from which fish. I think it's the zebra danios. It looks like the zebra danios. But he was able to survive in this tank with goldfish, which would normally eat those fry, because of the roots. The roots are super thick on some of these guys, and you may not be able to see that because actually some of these are newly added to this tank because we sell out of here. But the fry was able to live in the roots. So the roots act like a natural kind of grabber of just weird stuff like particles floating in the water, detritus, food particles. They'll grab onto the roots, and then the fry can eat them, or other organisms, let's say like shrimp or other fish, can pick at them and eat that leftover food or detritus or anything else and actually be able to survive. And that's why this fry in this tank has been able to survive, because it has shelter from the bigger fish and it has a nutrient source, which it traps the food there, they're able to eat it, and that's really it for them. So on top of absorbing all that fish waste that these floating plants do, they also help to cut down on algae. The reason being is they help to restrict the amount of light coming into the tank. Now, this is a double-bladed sword, or double-edged sword, because you may want a lot of light coming down into your tank, but because you have so many floating plants, they don't get light. Now, the trick is to have plants that you don't need to rely on a ton of light. Like I have a Nubis right now in this tank, and I pardon the appearance of this tank. This tank was just recently moved, as you can see here. We have a new setup going on, but that's going to be in a future video, so make sure you hit that subscribe button to check that out in the future. But so the Anubis doesn't need a ton of light, so the floating plants don't really affect that. These Anubis can grow under minimal lighting conditions. But if you had a really high-tech environment, lots of stems, like say this tank here, you would not want to have floating plants because they're going to block all the light. So it's a double-bladed sword, or double-edged sword. Why else do you want floating plants? Well, one, they can be a hassle. Like I said, they grow and they reproduce crazy amount of plants because they're not limited to anything really, because they have all the CO2 that they need. They're right next to your light. They're the closest thing to it. So they have everything they need, and they're going to absorb all the nutrients way faster than any other plant. But when they spread out and they completely cover the top of a tank, that's a lot of maintenance that you have to do. You have to constantly be removing them. So much so, the only reason why this tank has floating plants, because my 55 over here grows so many of them. Like, as you can see, this is just a mishmash of a bunch of different species all jumbled together, and it's just growing like crazy in here, so much so that I had to overflow it into this tank. And now I just take handfuls out of that tank and put them over here. So it does lead to more maintenance, but the good thing is floating plants, people always want these things, so you could sell these on the Facebook sites or the forums or anything like that, and people buy them up because they're great. Another thing having to do with their growth. Now see, if a floating plant completely covers the top of your water, and say you don't have any surface tension like I have here, this filter is actually breaking the water up, helping to create oxygen exchange between the atmosphere and the water, so it allows the air and oxygen to get into the water column. But if you didn't have that and you had a full top of all floating plants, you could actually damage your water, and by that it basically absorbs and blocks oxygen from entering the water. So it can create a really bad situation for fish that need high oxygen levels. So it's ideal if you do have floating plants to either run an air stone or have something that breaks the tension of the water and keeps the floating plants a little bit, you know, not fully covering the whole top of the tank. So, or, I mean, if you have a very minimal stocking, it could be okay too, but that's what you want to look out for. So that's really about it. Now we know what you're gonna say. What are some good floating plants? Can you recommend me some? Well, that's gonna be in a future video, so you're gonna want to stick around to check that out. But drop me a comment down below. Do you use floating plants? What do you think of them? Is there any other reason why you would use them? Or is there any reason why you wouldn't use them? Drop it down in the comments below. And I'll see you guys on the next one. I already told you all the other stuff, so later.